Now more of the Midcoast Morning Buzz with Richard and Jim. Radio 9, WCME.
Well, Jim, we are pleased to welcome our old friend Jackie. Well, I don't mean old, but our wonderful
not
friend.
Old at all.
No, not at all.
It's certainly, in comparison to us, not old.
Yes. Jackie Sartoris. She is attorney and principal at Sartoris Law here in Brunswick, specializing in elder law services. Jackie is also a former Brunswick Town councilor with 7 years of service on a variety of boards and committees in Brunswick, as well as former senior planner for the Maine State Planning Office. And Jim, bet you didn't know this, Jackie just won the 2013 National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys Young/New Attorneys Section Scholarship. That scholarship was established as a means to encourage new members to attend the national conference. Congratulations, Jackie.
I actually did know that because we got a news release on it when it happened.
Well, thank you. I wasn't aware that you guys were going to announce that. Obviously, I was very honored and thrilled to go to the conference, and I've learned a lot, which is always a good thing. So I think you guys wanted me to come today to talk about a piece of legislation.
Yes,
well, I was just going to remark that it's incredible how perpetually often Jackie Sartoris is on the cutting edge of our reality in this life, because just last week you were in here and we happened to be talking about elder abuse in particular, and you brought it up. And you said there was a lot happening in this area, and lo and behold, a week later, we get a passage of the bill to protect the elderly in the Maine House of Representatives, and you know something about the specifics of this bill, so why don't you talk about it?
That's right. Actually, it's a much-needed piece of legislation. This has been discussed and actually tried, I think, in the past in Maine. And Mark Dion
yes.
was the person who proposed this. Mark, of course, has a criminal justice background. He's now an attorney. He's well aware and has made some very compelling statements about his own experience of seeing the effects of elder abuse. Maine has struggled for years without really a criminal statute that enables law enforcement to properly go after those who abuse the elderly. I just want to put this into perspective a little bit, because I think a good question whenever government passes a piece of legislation and maybe gets it signed, I think this is an appropriations right now. First, I should give you the name of it. It is an act to protect elders and vulnerable adults from exploitation. It has gone to appropriations, and I think we can expect that this will pass. At that point, what will happen with the governor is, I think an open question. I don't know that he's taken a position on this particular bill. Why do we need this particular bill in Maine? Well, because there's an increasing problem with elder abuse nationally, and Maine, of course, with one of the oldest and really aging populations, particularly over 80. This is a growing problem for us in particular. Why is there elder abuse? People over 55 control about 75% of the nation's wealth, according to U.S. Senate report. And the largest growing segment of the population is over 80, with about half the people over 85 having some form of dementia, which makes this a very vulnerable population. Without a criminal statute in Maine that specifically identifies the ways that elders can be abused, it's very difficult to go after folks who commit elder abuse. Most of those people, unfortunately, are family members. So to the bill itself, the bill provides that dementia and other cognitive impairments are included in what is the concept of being manifestly unable to make a reasonable judgment regarding conduct that constitutes a crime when considering consent as a defense. So right now, if you say, Jackie, punch me in the nose, and I punch you in the nose, then you've consented to my activity. Now, we won't go into whether or not there might be a problem with me punching you in the nose despite consent. Right now, as it stands in Maine, there's some confusion in statute about whether or not an elder person, a vulnerable person, can actually have consented to having someone take their money, maybe take their property, sign over their real estate. And those are the kinds of behaviors that we're seeing in Maine over and over again.
Now, prior to this bill, was there a clear definition that constituted abuse, defining a physical abuse from financial abuse? Which is more rampant?
Financial exploitation is by far the biggest effect that we see on the elderly. And it really makes sense, as Dennis Cully, the staff attorney at Legal Services for the Elderly, says, you go where the money is. And with 75% of the nation's wealth really with folks who are ages, I think it's 50 and greater, 55 and greater, that's where the money is. We have increasingly numbers of younger folks who are having a tough time making ends meet, and you've always got in that population folks who just are maybe ethically challenged, shall we say. And so you've got this vulnerable population who have resources where maybe some folks are feeling like maybe they need to have those resources. And it's all too easy, I think, when you've got a vulnerable population. I mean, I'll give you another example. If children controlled 75% of the nation's wealth, that's a vulnerable population that can't consent to giving away their wealth. What this bill says is, for folks who are vulnerable, for folks who have dementia or who are dependent, they should not be presumed to be able to essentially defund themselves into a state of, real need. And that's what this bill attempts to do. I think it's a much-needed clarification of Maine law. There was only, I believe, one opponent who spoke about the bill, and that was the American Civil Liberties Union, the Maine chapter. Their testimony wasn't exactly opposed to the concept of doing something more for these elder abuse cases. They were concerned a little bit with whether we couldn't just read the existing statute to provide these protections now. The overwhelming consensus of those who work with the elderly and see elder abuse on a day-to-day basis is that Maine law currently is unclear. This would help to clarify that. I think there's a lot more that we could do, but this is a terrific first step.
Well, I would think that another factor here, not only do you have so much of the nation's wealth in the hands of older people, people over 55, there are so many more new people in that demographic every day of the world because we are, for now, an aging society, right? That's
right. It is the largest percentage of our population that is growing. It's not children. It's not people in their 20s. It is folks who are over 80. And as I said, after the age of 85, about half of that population suffers from some form of dementia. Folks who suffer from dementia are by far the most likely folks to experience elder abuse, but by no means is it limited to folks who suffer from dementia. Just a few more little statistics here. 85% of people who are experiencing elder abuse do not report it. So this is a vulnerable population that is largely the predatory behavior is from family members. There's a lot of shame associated with suddenly discovering that your finances, that your life maybe is in somebody else's hands whom you love, and you've not been able to prevent it.
Will this bill protect the elderly from third-party, out-of-state abusers? I'm going to use my late mother as an example. She suffered a massive heart attack and a stroke, made a full recovery, but in the latter years of her life, she led a very sedentary life and was alone most of the time, and was a victim of a lot of phone calls from people selling her cable subscriptions to cable she already has, magazine subscriptions, things like that she didn't need, over and over and over again, and the money just racked up. Now, does this bill protect people from that sort of abuse from outside parties?
This bill does not really change the experience of telemarketing fraud. There is obviously there are statutes out there that are supposed to be, to a limited extent, effective. They're just not. I get phone calls because I'm identified as someone who's involved in elderly issues. I think that I am now on the phone call list for let's try to disenfranchise this elder person. So I actually do get phone calls myself periodically. I got one yesterday from a fellow who said, "We're just calling to arrange delivery of your medical device." And I thought, boy, I couldn't get the information from him that I wanted to get, which was exactly who are you and how do I figure out how to, do bad things to you in exchange for what you're trying to do to the elderly. It's very, very difficult to go after that sort of telemarketing scam, in part because you've got a vulnerable person at the other end who's saying, yes, go ahead, take my money. And I think we have to be really careful, and here I'm going to take the civil liberties line a little bit. I think we have to be really careful about saying that the elderly can't make any choices for themselves. So there's a fine line here between saying we need to protect vulnerable people who are being, disenfranchised of all of their resources, and we also need to protect them from their own ability to make their own independent decisions. I think there's a fine line here, and I think from the civil liberties standpoint, it's really a dangerous place to say that, you're over 60, you're just not allowed to make your own choices, guys. So I think that's definitely a tension. I think this statute, in cases where it's pretty clear that there's been a transfer of finances, and the defense of that is, Granny no longer has any money, and she, by the way, also doesn't qualify for main care for a while because she's transferred all that money, or she's transferred her real estate. And that's the other side of this we should talk about for just a minute. The defense of, she told me I could, is going to be no longer the quickie way to get out of trouble. And that really matters. It also increases the criminal penalties for some of this behavior. That really matters. For the folks out there who like to say, well, we've already got ways to handle this. It's really enough. Or you can always sue. There is very little money left by the time elder abuse comes to light when it's about financial exploitation. So Dennis Cully, again, great guy. Worked with him briefly at Legal Services when I was doing some summer interning in law school. What he says is that those folks, he recently got a judgment, over $1 million judgment, against someone who had taken, I think it was over $300,000 of this elder woman's money. The $1 million is never going to matter to this woman. She has none of those resources, and the person who took them, of course, has none of those resources. So the idea that civil suits is really going to make the difference here, just not likely to happen.
I want to pursue this just a little bit further. Our guest here is Jackie Sartoris, who's an attorney in Brunswick, specializing in elder and elder care issues, and a former member of the Brunswick Town Council. And Jackie, I was reading over the Associated Press story on the passage of this bill, and it ends with a rather compelling statistic from the Maine Department of Health and Human Services saying last year 1 in 5 Mainers over the age of 65 have been exploited financially by family, caregivers, or scammers. That's 20%. That's more than 20%. That's staggering.
It really is. And of those folks that we know about, there are at least, another 8 or 9 who have not reported the financial exploitation. I do just want to get back to Richard's point, though, because although this is not an elder-specific thing, there is a do-not-call list. Mm-hmm. And for any family member who is elderly, or any family member who really just doesn't want to be harassed by telemarketers, getting on the national do-not-call list, they've now made it very easy to do. You can enter as many phone numbers as you want. So it covers cell numbers, it covers your home number. Most elderly folks still have a landline. I know that's something that my teenage children find still highly amusing. But putting those phone numbers out there can be a really big help in getting people off of that list of telemarketers to begin with. And then I also think sitting down and talking with elderly parents and saying, look, everybody is out for a piece of somebody right now when it comes to these telemarketing scams. If someone calls you and you don't know who they are, you can hang up. And I think that, for that generation, being rude does not come naturally. Yeah. But I think if you can talk through with the elderly person what they're likely to experience, it's just very difficult to figure out how to kind of make that fine line between adequate independence and protection from exploitation happen. I do want to cover just a couple of other things, a few other things that ought to happen. Massachusetts has a handyman registry. What my friend Dennis Cully likes to say is the evil handyman is one of the roots to elder abuse, and we really see cases like that pretty frequently in Maine. There is no registry right now for handymen. So if somebody shows up and says, for a very small amount of money I can fix what I see clearly is a little problem with your roof, and then the roof is essentially removed, and you're then left continuing to fund a project that you didn't intend to enter into. This is not an uncommon scenario, particularly for an elderly person. This is a real pathway to exploitation potentially. So we have no registry right now in Maine. There's no requirement. If you have had a real, miserable experience, it's very difficult to figure out how to protect protect other people from that miserable experience. I think the Massachusetts statute makes a lot of sense. Two other things: beware of joint accounts. A lot of people think that joint accounts with a family member is a great idea. That is often also a pathway to elder exploitation. And amateur estate planning. And of course, I have a vested interest here in someone who helps with estate planning and main care planning. But I will just tell you that my vested interest is really in trying to make sure that people don't end up where a lot of the elderly end up. Folks have these conflated ideas that, well, I can give away $10,000 and $10,000 and $10,000, and that won't hurt me because of the rules about income tax and gift tax. Gift tax and income tax is one piece of a puzzle. The other piece is main care eligibility. And if you give away your resources, there is a 5-year look-back period for main care eligibility. What does that mean? That means if you give away, for example, you sign over your home, if you've given away maybe $70,000 worth of property, which is what most people who are elderly are going to have, maybe the value of their home, you are not eligible for main care funding for 10 full months. That means that if you need nursing home care and you've given away $70,000, you may find yourself unable to access nursing home care. I mean, obviously, we've got emergency care here in Maine. No one's going to, fundamentally turn you away. But you can have a major financial problem if you're giving away money thinking that that is going to help out your family and not also potentially cost you. Don't do estate planning at home. Call someone. It's definitely worth the time it takes.
Jackie Sartoris proving that attorneys still sometimes occasionally work for free. On our airwaves.
Well, we'll see.
You ought to at least have a phone number, but not for me.
Well, you can. You're welcome to give your phone number here. Earned your keep.
My phone number is 441-4654, and of course, I am more than happy to speak with anyone and to tell you, resources that maybe you can also access for free. But the Office of Elder Services in Maine is 1-800-624-8404. And those folks really do look out for people who are incapacitated or dependent. They are looking at elder abuse. They will follow up. The other phone number I'm going to give you is for legal services for the elderly, and that is 1-800-750-5353. Maine has a no wrong door policy. If you reach out to one of these folks who are helping the elderly, they'll send you to the right place. June 15th is International Elder Abuse Prevention Day. Please consider just reaching out to one of your elderly neighbors and just checking in on them.
Just one other thing. Anything in this bill for people like Richard and myself who are getting along in years and maybe suffer from undiagnosed forms of dysfunction? Anything for us in this bill?
I didn't see in here the undiagnosed forms of dysfunction. They didn't criminalize undiagnosed forms of dysfunction, guys, so I think you'll be okay.
Fortunately for you, Jim, I have short-term memory loss, so no problem, buddy. Our guest this morning has been Jackie Sartoris, attorney and principal at Sartoris Law here in Brunswick, specializing in elder law services. Jackie, we'll do it again. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Radio 9 WCME.